Hi, this is Dr. Karen Wilson Starks, your host for the Voice of Leadership, the show for business executives and global corporations who appreciate a principled biblical lens on leadership, featuring the song Consuming Fire by gospel jazz saxophonist Ron McMillan. You are listening to our resource renewal series featuring shows for times such as these. Every day, we have the opportunity to derive inspiration from natural beauty. And because I live in Colorado Springs, there are many opportunities to actually see natural beauty. Often, when I'm driving down the street in Colorado Springs, I look up and I can see snow on the mountains, and it's so beautiful. Or I can see the early morning purple mountain majesty. And for those of you who don't know, the song America the Beautiful was written right here in Colorado Springs from the top of our tallest mountain in the town, which is Pikes Peak, which is more than 14,000 feet above sea level. So when I see this beautiful purple mountain majesty, which really is a real phenomenon, especially early in the morning, you can see it. Also in Colorado, I've lived in other places where you can see rainbows. However, here you see lots of rainbows in the summer, and frequently there are double rainbows, a double arch across the sky. And in a lot of places where I've lived, you only see a piece of the rainbow. Here you can see where it starts from one end of the earth, arches all the way over, and lands on the other side. It is just so phenomenal to see that. And sometimes I can see the sun and the moon in the sky at the same time because the sun is going down and the moon is rising. So the greater light is retiring for the day and the lesser light is coming up for the night. I love seeing this, and I love seeing when the moon is that size, when it's gigantic and huge and sitting right at the top of the horizon. Very, very beautiful here in Colorado Springs. Or if sometimes just driving down the street and it's been snowing, especially a nice spring snow, and the snow is on the evergreen trees. Oh, that is just a phenomenal sight. And I say spring because I don't like really driving in the snow when it's dangerous. However, frequently in the spring snows, the driving surface is clear. It's fine. The snow is just on all the trees and the grasses and the bushes and so on. And it can be so breathtaking. Sometimes as I'm rounding a corner at Pikes Peak in Burgess and I see it, or if I see the snow on the trees, I almost just have to stop. And in the moment, I just have to tell God, thank you for the beauty which you've provided today. Thank you for the beautiful place where I live. Now, my husband, Greg, is an amateur photographer, and he loves to take photographs of God painting the sky. And the sky is not always the same, it's very dynamic. So sometimes those photographs will show a pink and blue sky, and it looks like a watercolor painting. It's so gorgeous. Other times the sky is yellow and it's orange. And other times you'll see white, billowy clouds, and sometimes there'll be those dark gray, more foreboding kinds of clouds in the sky. And one of his favorite things to do is to take pictures of the moon in all different stages and phases. And those moon pictures are very beautiful as well. And often when I'm running around busy and I'm about to go to my next meeting or appointment, he'll stop me and he'll say, let me show you these pictures, and it will be an inspiration for your day. And sometimes I don't want to stop. However, I'll tell you this, I'm always thankful when I do, because whatever he shows me, it is an inspiration for my day. Now, I grew up in Baltimore, Maryland, and I remember the homes of two people in particular that I really loved when I was growing up. One family that I used to visit, They had a house right in the middle of the woods, and there weren't any houses that you could see right around them. There were houses nearby, but the woods were such that you really couldn't see where those houses were. There was a lot of land between each house. And this house was in the woods, so many tall, beautiful trees. It was really quiet. It was on the outskirts of the city. And I loved going there because it was peaceful and it was really beautiful. It was one of my favorite houses, so much so that I said, one day I'd like to live in a house in the woods. That's never happened. However, I always have that picture of that house in the woods. Another home that I really loved was a house that was really in the city, and it was right next door to plenty of other houses. It was one of those traditional kind of row houses, as they're called in Baltimore, where the houses are attached and they're right next to each other. However, this house was in a heavily treed area, beautiful, tall, mature trees all around, all on the property of the house, all on the entire street. And the house sat up, all the houses sat up on a little hill. You had to go up a lot of steps to get up to the front door. However, if you came down the steps and you were on the sidewalk, then you'd see the street, the driving surfaces where cars were, and directly on the other side of the street from where the cars were driving, there was like a ravine in the middle of the street where there was a brook, like a babbling brook of water that flowed all day, and you could hear the water flowing. I loved that home because of the trees and that babbling brook that was going by. And in fact, the lady who lived there, she often would say, "Oh, I don't really like it here and I want to move." And I just couldn't understand why she would want to leave such a gorgeous place of so much inspiration every day from natural beauty. Also, growing up in Baltimore, frequently we would go over to Washington, D.C. occasionally. And there's a street in Washington, D.C. that was called 16th Street. And on that street, there were these huge and beautiful homes like mansions, and the trees were tall and big and beautiful, and they kind of overhung in the street. And I said, one day I would love to live on 16th Street in Washington, D.C. Now, I never actually got to live on 16th Street. However, when I was in the Army, I did work at Walter Reed Hospital when it was in Washington, D.C., on 16th Street and Georgia Avenue. And so every day I got to drive down 16th Street as I went to work and to see that beauty as well. So, from my current home in Colorado Springs, I can look out the front window and I can see Pikes Peak. We don't have any woods here, but we do have the mountains, and it is still very beautiful. And Pikes Peak changes with every season and every day, and also at different times of the day, and whether there's clouds rolling by or not. So, every day there's that feast for the eyes of natural beauty. Now, even though I live in the mountains, my true place of inspiration is the ocean. And growing up on the Atlantic Ocean in Baltimore and right there with the Baltimore Harbor, I love the ocean, and it's my place of true peace and creativity. When I am in a hotel room at the ocean, I make sure that I have an oceanfront room where I can just look out the window or be on the balcony and see the whole expanse of the ocean and hear the waves crashing against the rocks. And I like to keep the window open at night so I can hear it all night and so I can also see it as well. When I hear the power of the water of the ocean, I feel most in touch with the power of God. That ocean is such a dynamic movement, and the ocean is teeming with life. I love that. When I need to do some strategic thinking about my business and to think about next steps and what might be a possibility in the future, I always go to the ocean. And in fact, when my mother died, and I was in a really busy season, and when that season ended and it was right after Christmas, I took a trip, just a solo trip to the ocean, because that's my place of peace, rejuvenation, and it's the place that refills my personal cup. And after I spent my few days at the ocean, then I came back home to the mountains. So when we're around all of this natural beauty, it inspires or can inspire thanksgiving and gratefulness, and it can inspire more expansive ideas. And those expansive ideas come from the master creator who is speaking to us through his creation. Now, I also love cities. I'm really very fond of New York City, as a matter of fact. I love the energy and the vibrancy of the city. I know it can be a concrete jungle. However, I like the noise, I like the sounds, I like the people in the city. And yet at the same time, it's challenging sometimes. I'm walking down the streets with all those big buildings and the light is obscured. So it can be darker earlier in New York City just because the buildings are so tall and they're blocking out the sun. That's very different from when I lived in Kansas, where there were beautiful, beautiful sunsets every day, and you could see the sky. There was no encumbrance, no barrier, no impediment, not even the mountains were an impediment there. You could see the whole horizon, or sometimes in Hawaii, beautiful sunrises as well for the same reason, because there's no impediment. So even if you live in a city, a big city like New York, you have to make time sometimes to get out of the city to see the natural beauty, or in the city to go to Central Park or some other place where you'll see some trees, where you'll see some grass, and you'll see nature and what God has created. And so today, the reason why I'm mentioning this, as a business person, not only do you need the peace, the rejuvenation, and the refilling of the cup, it helps to refresh your mind for the innovation and creativity that's necessary to think of the responses, solutions, and answers to the challenges in your business and in your life. So remember to take time to be in God's beautiful nature. And I want to end today by reading the verses from Psalm, the 19th chapter. And it says, starting with verse 1, the heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament shows his handiwork. Day unto day utters speech, and night unto night reveals knowledge. There is no speech nor language where their voice is not heard. Their line has gone out through all the earth, and their words to the end of the world. In them he has set a tabernacle for the sun, which is like a bridegroom coming out of his chamber, and rejoices like a strong man to run its race. Its rising is from one end of heaven, and its circuit to the other end, and there is nothing hidden from its heat. So listen closely to the voice of God's creation and what he may be saying to you through all that he has created. Hi, this is Dr. Karen Wilson Starks with the Voice of Leadership. And today I want to ask you, is this your blooming season, or is the blooming season over? And what made me think about this, even as we're about to change seasons right now, is that I got an orchid plant several months ago from a dear first cousin and his wife. And what they didn't know is that I'm probably one of the most horrible people with plants. And I didn't want it to die. And I loved it. It was so beautiful. I love flowers. And those of you who know me know I have clothes with lots of flowers on them. I wear flowers in my hair. So I'm a big flower person. I'm just not a great horticulturist myself. And so I really wanted to keep this orchid alive. And so I studied up on it a little bit to figure out what would be the best approaches and so on. And I'm happy to report that the orchid bloomed for about 3.5 months. And the growing season and cycle is such that you might get to keep the blooms for about anywhere from 2 months to 4 months. So for me, that was great because I was almost at the 4 month mark in terms of how long I kept this orchid going. And it really got me to thinking about other lessons that we can learn from orchids and whether they're in bloom or not, and what is the application to business. So that's what I'm really going to talk about today. When an orchid is in bloom, there are various ways you take care of it. First, they like it mild, they like it warm, they like it humid, somewhere between 50 and 90 degrees, and usually more like 70 degrees would be great, and maybe 40 to 70% humidity. So already this summer, it was close to 100 degrees when I was dealing with this orchid, and we don't have very much humidity here in Colorado, so it wouldn't be maybe ideal conditions with low humidity. Now, orchids don't like a whole lot of water. They don't want to be drowned in water. They like very little water. So if you've got a 5 or 6 inch pot for your flower, you would put about a fourth of a cup of water in there once a week as a maximum in general. And what some people do is they actually use ice cubes. And about 3 ice cubes is equivalent to about a fourth a cup of water. So, depending on how big the plant is, will determine how much water you need to put in there. Now, you want to put the ice cubes in the soil and the other material that's in the pot, though not on the leaves. You don't want to freeze the leaves. You're just using it as a water source. Now, also, orchids like indirect light, not real direct light. So, if you have a place that's eastern facing or southern facing, that's probably perfect for an orchid. Western might be a little bit too hot, and north might be a little bit too cold. Now, when you water the plant, you want to water it thoroughly and also drain it thoroughly so that the water is running out of the bottom and not pooling anywhere, because you don't want the roots to start to rot or to mold. And between waterings, you are letting the plant dry out. Now, you're doing all of this, which is really a lot of work, in my opinion, keeping up with all of this. And this is how you take care of it during the blooming season. And you want to make sure that the material that the orchid is planted in is slightly acidic, maybe some kind of bark, different kind of moss, peat. And those who deal with orchids can give you more detailed information and instruction about what you're really looking for. And as you're watering it every week, you want to check the roots to make sure they're healthy. So the healthy roots would be plump, they'd be white, they'd be green. That's a well-watered plant. Now, if it's shriveled up and if it's gray, well, that plant needs some water. If it's spongy, if it's black, if it's brown, then it might have too much water and it might be rotting. Now, there are times you might be in a place where it's much hotter and you might need to water the orchid up to 2 times a week in a climate where it's warmer and where the plant is blooming and growing. And that's when it needs its most care during that time. Now, let's say the blooming season is over, and that's what's happened with my orchid. It's come to the end of the blooming season. I just took off the last half a bloom today. And so now it's in a dormant phase or a quiescent phase. And I say that because all the rest of the time, as one flower would fade out, another flower would come in, and it just kept blooming and kept blooming and kept blooming in that way. Now, once it stops growing and now it's in that resting phase, this is the time when you have to do some other kind of work for maintenance. During this time, you might actually water it even less, maybe only the once a week. The plant might take slightly more sun, but still you don't want to be in direct sun. And somewhere towards the spring or later in its quiescent phase, you might want to repot the plant. You don't repot it at all while it's growing. That would be the wrong time to do repotting. And before you repot, you want to snip off what they call the flower spikes. So where the flower has been growing, you snip that down all the way to the branch, unless you have a certain kind of orchid that can still regrow with those same snips, the same area, the same spikes. And that's only one variety, and I think it's called a phalaenopsis or something like that. So You'll have to look it up and see if you have one of those kinds of orchids. Otherwise, you cut that little spike right down to the branch. Now, you can't just go and cut it off. You have to sterilize whatever you're using, whether it's scissors, whether it's a razor blade. You have to sterilize that with alcohol because orchids like very clean environment and clean condition. And you don't want to transfer any germs or difficulties to the plant by using tools that have not been disinfected and have not been sterilized. Now, somewhere along the line, while you are in this quiet phase, that's later the time you would fertilize the plant as well. And you would feed it with the kind of fertilizer that's appropriate for orchids and something that's water soluble. And you wouldn't use this during the growing season, but later on during the more dormant phase. Now, a great pot for an orchid is one where it's kind of tightly in there, like a plastic container that has holes in it so that the water is going to come out the bottom, but not so many big holes that all of the material that's in there comes out. You don't want that. So you have to have the right size holes. And then you would put it in an unglazed clay pot as well. So this is really quite an operation to keep up with what's going on with an orchid. And the reason, by the way, that you remove the faded blooms, like I removed one today, is because you don't want to keep feeding something that's dead or dying, because those nutrients can be used for new growth later rather than to feed old growth that's not really going to come back. So there's all of this that you're paying attention to. Now, in addition, there are some pests and there are some situations that can also bother orchids. There are some kinds of spider mites, certain kind of fungus gnats, and other kind of, I'll say, insects that can bother orchids. If you see them, you might have to just brush them off and away from the plant, or you might even have to use a soapy water solution in order to clean them up. Or you might use a little bit of neem, which is kind of like a health food oriented thing. It's sort of like a disinfectant, if you will, natural sort of disinfectant as well. So, what you're looking for during all this time is you're looking for any challenges or difficulties, like if the leaves start getting brown or black spots or other kind of problems, it could mean that it's got a virus. If the plant gets a virus, it really can't be salvaged. And if you have other plants, then the best thing to do is to throw it away because the virus might spread to other plants and cause other problems. Bacteria, you can also treat sometimes if it gets a bacteria, but they're very finicky if they get any of these things. So pay attention. If it has yellow leaves, you might be over watering it. It might be getting too much water. And look for stress. So, for example, let's say the buds come out for the flowers, but then it doesn't bloom. Again, there may be some stress, maybe too much water, maybe not enough water, maybe it doesn't have enough sunlight. It's in a place that it doesn't thrive in, doesn't care for. And if you've got your plant in a place that's good for it, in that case, you can get blooms up to twice a year with your orchid. Now, a lot of people don't go through all this work. They'll just throw it away, buy a new one when it's in a blooming season. However, if you want to keep it, these are some things that you can do. Now, if it's showing these signs of stress, you might have to reduce the temperature for a couple of nights in order to get it to bloom. And you might have to again change the lighting or the food that you're feeding the plant, or do something different that gives it a better environment for your particular orchid. And if you need to increase humidity, you might also keep it on a bed of moistened pebbles to increase humidity. But again, remember, you're not putting it in water, you're not letting it sit in standing water or get rotted out or molded at the bottom in any way. Now, one thing to remember with orchids is even though they're not blooming in the season and they can look kind of unattractive or boring or like nothing's happening, this dormant period is part of the natural growing cycle. And there are even some bulbs they call back bulbs that remain green on the plant. However, those are no longer going to produce the leaves and flowers themselves However, they do feed nutrients and energy to active bulbs. So during this time, the plant is recharging, it's rebuilding its energy for the next flowering season. So don't think that nothing's going on. Dormancy is also part of growth. It's a part of building energy, getting strength for the next growing season. Now, when I think about this in terms of your company or your organization and what you're trying to grow and what you're trying to create in your company, I see several things maybe to pay attention to and to just think about what the parallels are. So, for one thing, you have to, with orchids and with companies, you have to stop, you have to inspect the plant, inspect the company, see what's going on, observe and pay attention. What do you see? Are you seeing yellow leaves? Are you seeing leaves that are mushy and drooping? Are you seeing leaves that are stiffened and rising up? They all tell you something different. And when you stop to inspect and to observe and you're paying attention, assess the needs. What needs to shift? What else do you need to look at? Do you need to pull the orchid out of its container to see what the roots are looking like? And that may give you some more information so you can better assess needs, but you are assessing needs to determine if you have the right environment, if you have the right food for your business at this time and this season. So, what environment are you providing for your company right now? What is the sustenance that you're using to keep things green and alive and growing, or to keep things building during the dormant season for when you're going to be blooming again? So that's number three, providing the right environment and the right food and so on. And then number four is being willing to try different approaches. Educate yourself. What does your company need? And if you've already tried X and it doesn't work, maybe you want to try Y and see if that could get better results. And informed experiments. You are looking at what's worked before, what's worked in the past, what's worked for companies like yours. What are the dynamics in your company that may be different from the dynamics in someone else's company? And then you're making some strategic decisions about what to try. And five is, even as you're doing all of this, remember to be responsive. You don't just set it and forget it. You may have to make multiple changes throughout the year in order to have the optimal conditions for success in your company. And remember that growth occurs in different cycles, and even the quiet phase, the dormant phase, is part of the growth cycle. You want to know what kind of organization you have and what are the specific care and instructions for your organization. Do you have an entrepreneurial startup? Are you in the early phase? Are you in the late phase of a startup? Are you a seasoned company that's been around for 200 or 300 years? A company that's large, has a big footprint, and maybe it's even global. You're going to need different things than a startup mom and pop shop. You're going to need some different aspects in order to grow. And keep in mind that just like those older bulbs on an orchid feed other parts of the plant that are still growing in your organization, you have parts of the business that are mature, services and products that have been making money for a long time and that are kind of like your go-to place. And they give some margin and ability for you to experiment and innovate with new services and new products along the way. So keep in mind, one size doesn't fit all. What works for you, what your sweet spot is not necessarily the same as for another organization. So it's important to remember to change the care, the feeding, and the strategy as needed. Identify the pests and the diseases out there, both internally that can threaten your company and also externally that can threaten your company. So if I think about internally, for example, you may have silos where people are not communicating and talking to one another, which is a lost opportunity that's left on the table. You may have a lack of collaboration. Instead of collaborating, people may have a lot of strife from internal competition and jealousies and infighting. And all that does is to make you weaker and to take away from your growth and growth cycle and causing things to flourish in your organization. This is all internal sabotage of one sort or another. You may also have some external assaults from competitors. It's just that, like that biblical example that said that while the farmer was asleep, an enemy came and sowed tares in among the wheat. So there are people who may be out there to do you harm. And so you want to be conscious of and cognizant of what's going on in the external environment that could also affect your corporate environment. The bottom line of all of this, whether we're talking about plants or whether we're talking about organizations, is that it's a matter of keeping things in balance. If you have too much fertilizer, that's going to kill the plant. If you don't have enough, the plant's not going to have what it needs to grow and to grow in a robust way. If you have too much light, it's going to scorch and kill the plant. If you don't have enough light, it's not going to bloom. If you have too much water, the plant's going to rot and it's not going to thrive and it'll probably die. Not enough water, and the same thing, it's going to shrivel up and die on you. So you need just the right amount of water for sustenance. You need the right amount of soil or the kind of product in which you are planting the orchid. And you need the right size holes, even for the plastic pot that you have inside the ceramic pot. So, in order to know what to do in your business and to keep this balance, you need information. You need continuous feedback loops so that you can take the corrective action that's necessary. You need inspiration in the company, some robust and exciting goals and objectives. And you need to pay attention to the roots. Are they healthy? And what might the roots be? The roots might be your values. What are the values that the company stands by and that you want all team members to really live by in the workplace? Perhaps part of your root system is your history, your heritage. Heritage as a company. Perhaps it's your reputation in the marketplace, your brand, the market share that you've managed to gather over the years. So there are a lot of levers and a lot of gauges that you are looking at to assess and ascertain the health of your business and your company, even as it's continuing to grow, whether in a flourishing stage of growth, the flowering stage, or a more dormant and preparatory stage of growth. So when we think about the orchid, there are parallels to your business, to your company, and there are also parallels not just at the big picture company level, also at the individual level of the people in your organization. So when I think about the individual application, I'm thinking about the seasoned workers who are there and who actually come alongside the newer employees to do knowledge transfer, to share wisdom, and to help develop the next generation and to increase that bench strength and to engage in the succession planning process. So there's a reason that those seasoned people are there. Even if some of the younger people can work circles around them now, they still have valuable input that the younger worker can use and needs in order to save time and energy. You also want to look at the individual level. What does development look like for each person on your executive team? Who needs what? When do they need it? And how much? Just like every orchid is different, every person in your organization is different. And you want to have a development plan that meets the needs of that individual person. Some orchids might need more water than others. Some might need more or less sun or fertilizer. You have to look at each one individually and figure out what is the proper care plan. And you have to be able to see the signs of stress in each one of your people to know what to do, what's missing, what do they need, how can you change the envelope for them to get a different outcome. You might need to move that person to a new spot, just like the orchid has to get a different sun angle. You might have to repot that person in terms of where you place them and what you have them doing. Maybe it's a bigger role, maybe it's a bigger opportunity where they're not so cramped. It's just in a new place with new people where they can grow, thrive, and flourish at a greater degree because they've outgrown where they are. So I want you to just imagine that the lessons from the orchid are at the organizational level and also at the individual level as well. So as we close today, thinking about lessons from the orchid plant, and I'll keep you posted and let you know if I get another growing season from my current orchid and if I'm able to care for it in the way that it needs to be cared for, such that I'll see some more beautiful flowers maybe in a few more months. I'd say 6 more months from now. So we'll wait and see what happens. I want to read something that is a picture that Jesus shared of a parable. It's a parable about a fig tree that wasn't bearing fruit. This is from Luke, the 13th chapter, starting with verse 6, and it says, He also spoke this parable, and he meaning Jesus. A certain man had a fig tree planted in his vineyard, and he came seeking fruit on it and found none. Then he said to the keeper of his vineyard, Look, for 3 years I have come seeking fruit on this fig tree and find none. Cut it down. Why does it use up the ground? But he answered and said to him, Sir, let it alone this year also until I dig around it and fertilize it. And if it bears fruit, well, but if not, after that, you can cut it down. So when you think about your organization, there are things that are in an infancy, incubation, innovation period, and maybe it looks like you should get rid of it. And perhaps what you really need to do is nurture it a little bit longer and see if it will take off at a later time. And then let's say you've given it its trials, it's finished going through all of those, and it's time to cut it down. At least you will know we've done everything we could possibly do. The same is true with people. People need to grow into jobs and responsibilities and organizations. Give them the time to grow and to manifest their gifts and talents. And if after a reasonable time they have not shown what is necessary, despite the water, despite the fertilizer, the sunlight, and everything else that you provide, well, in that case, you might have to toss that one or place it in another location or have it fulfill a different role, is what I would say. And that's what I would remind you about. So remember this parable of the fig tree as you think about what next. Is it blooming season or is this the quiescent phase? Is this the time of dormancy where my people, my plants, my organization, my company give that time to your people for continued growth? So thank you for being with me today. And I look forward to speaking with you next time about other subjects that inspire growth. In some parts of the world, including the United States, loneliness, depression, and suicide are at an all-time high. With me today is Dr. Clarence Schuler, President and CEO of Building Lasting Relationships. He personally experienced a bout of depression. Dr. Schuler, tell us a little bit about what you learned in your experience and what resources you have available for us.
Well, mental health is a really big thing in America today, like you said, and African American men are the number one depressed group in America. And I think men in general would come into that. And when I went through my depression, it was really a thing of idolatry. I hate to say that, but I was trying to validate myself by how much money I made or my success. And I was fortunate enough to have a Christian counselor, Dr. Monique Gadsden, who helped me work through that. So now I'm managing my depression more effectively. And so one of the resources that we have is our book, Finding Hope in a Dark Place, Facing Loneliness, Depression, and Anxiety with the Power of Grace. And so I hope you will use it as a resource just to see where you are emotionally. It's not a sin to be depressed. So I just want to encourage you and give you hope that your depression can come under control.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Schuler. And what I want everyone to know, as he already said, this is a book that was co-written with his counselor. So it is the real deal. If you want to know more about the book or more about services that are available to deal with depression and loneliness, go to drclarenceschuler.com. That's clarenceschuler.com. Hi, this is Dr. Karen Wilson Starks, your host for the Voice of Leadership And today I am talking about the care and feeding of orchids part two. And if you heard part one, you will know that more than a year ago, I received a beautiful orchid plant from my cousin and his wife. And not being the horticulturist myself, I had a hard time figuring out how do I care for this orchid and how do I keep it alive? Well, I talked about that in episode 442, which was in September of 2023. And I was so happy at that time that I had kept that orchid blooming for almost 4 months, which really was quite a feat for me. Well, since that time, many other things have happened to the orchid. And so let me give you an update. As I promised, I'd come back, give an update, and have some additional leadership lessons that we can learn from the care and feeding of orchids. Well, first of all, the orchid plant had very healthy green leaves, and I did a really great job with watering it so that it wasn't overwatered or underwatered, and the green leaves stayed beautiful for a long time. And then the beginning of the year happened, and my schedule changed, and I started traveling much more aggressively. And I was gone for long periods of time, 10 to 14 days. And I had to figure out what to do with this orchid. Well, in the meantime, I also wanted the orchid to bloom again. So I consulted a very good friend of mine who truly has a green thumb and has a house full of blooming, beautiful orchids and does a great job. And so she gave me some tips about how to make it bloom again. And that looked like it was going to be a very time-consuming process for someone like me who's traveling often and on the road. So I said, well, I'll just wait until a little bit later before I implement some of those strategies. Well, in the meantime, with all of this aggressive traveling that I was doing, I had to figure out how do I water this orchid and keep it alive until I come back. Well, one of the times I watered the orchid too much. I was trying to make that water last until I would return. When I got home, I saw the dreaded yellow leaves of the beautiful green leaves. They had turned yellow. And from all the research that I did last year, I knew that that meant the orchid had gotten too much water. So now my poor orchid was drowning in water and it was dying. So when I touched those yellow leaves, they just fell off right into my hands. So I had about two good leaves left. And I said, okay, let me see if I can salvage these two that are remaining. So then I'll go on the next trip and I said, okay, this time I'm not going to overwater the plant. So I just make sure I give the plant just a small amount of water. And when I came back, the plant was stressed in the opposite direction. Now it was starving. Now it was dying of thirst and it was shriveling up. And I lost one of the two good leaves, and the one that was remaining was small and puny and didn't look like he was going to make it either. So then I was like, what do I do now? And I wasn't really sure how to salvage this, but I figured, okay, let me work on it. I have salvaged plants in the past, brought them back from near disaster, and I thought, well, I could do it again. So let me figure it out and let me work on it. Well, in the meantime, the same wonderful first cousin of mine and his wife, they gave me another beautiful orchid plant for this year. And it was even more spectacular than last year. It had more green plants in it. It was more diverse. And then I thought, oh, how nice. I will then cultivate both of these plants. However, my husband took a look at the first plant and he said, nope, this plant is gone. It has outlived its life. It's time for it to go. I said, no, no, I don't want it to go. I want to bring it back to health. He said, time to go. You have a new plant now. And so he sent the plant on to plant heaven. And then I have the new plant that I'm cultivating and working on at the moment. And so far, so good. The new plant is still alive. Well, there are a lot of lessons in all of this about what to pay attention to and how to think about everything that happened. I know that in my case, when my circumstances changed, I really needed to make some changes too. Now, what I could have done with the plant when my circumstances changed, and my friend, unfortunately, she was recovering from surgery at the hospital, so I didn't want to do this first thing, which was I could have sent the plant to her. It could have been in the plant hospital. She would have put it in with all of her plants, took care of it. It probably would have done much better, and she would have returned it to me in great shape. However, it was not a good time for me to do that because of her own circumstances. The other thing that I really could have done was to get one of those time-released water bulbs and put that in the plant so that therefore it would get water while it was gone, but not too much and not too little. Now, I didn't do any of those things, and so that's why I'm telling you this story about the fate of the plant and what happened to the orchid. So, as far as leadership lessons, there are several that I want to share with you about this experience. Number one, in leadership, when you are dealing with something new, a new set of circumstances, maybe where you don't have knowledge and expertise, get outside help. Consult with knowledgeable people. Now, you know, I did get outside help. I studied books, I talked to people. So I did consult and get outside help. That's number one. Number two, however, is even more important, which is follow the expertise that your outside consultant shares with you. I followed some of it, but not all of it. And this really reminds me of some of my clients. We'll be talking about things and I'll make some recommendations for what their next steps might be. And they might, for various reasons, just like I did with the orchid, just not implement whatever it is that we're talking about. And then later on, when the orchid dies or the leaves turn yellow or whatever is happening in their organization, they'll come back and I'll say, well, did you implement what we talked about? Well, no, we didn't do that. And of course, I had predicted upfront that this would be the outcome. And they say, yeah, we remember that. And yet, life gets in the way. There are reasons sometimes why we really don't implement what we know to do and what we've heard about from our outside consultants and experts. So, in those cases, you can't always do everything yourself because, as I mentioned, life gets in the way. So, that brings me to number three is to get hands on help for whatever it is that you're doing. And in my case, that hands-on help could have been in the form of my friend who could have been babysitting the plant, or someone else could have babysat the plant while I was gone. And I could have gotten some tech help, which reminds me metaphorically, think about the technology that we use, including artificial intelligence. Well, that little water bulb would have been just a picture of that. Could have gotten some outside help to be my hands when I wasn't there. And so you want to do the same thing in your organization. You want to get help from others who are in the organization and help from those who are outside the organization. This extends your reach and your ability to make a difference. And then, of course, when circumstances change, you want to change strategies. Now, last year, it was perfectly fine because I was in town most weeks and I could water the plant every week and give it that small amount of water that it needed. And in this year, my circumstances changed. I wasn't available to water the plant every single week in the same way. So that requires new strategies. So in your business, when your circumstances change, look at your procedures, look at your processes, and identify what also needs to alter and what also needs to change, and make sure that you make the changes that go with the season that you're in your business. And then the next item, if this is important, we have to accept that all things come to an end. There is a natural cycle of life, and there's an end date to everything. So we want to remember the good times that we had with those who took the journey with us up to this point, and then learn to say goodbye. And there is an art to saying goodbye. You take some time in saying goodbye when it's real people, and yet you have to say goodbye. And I don't know if you remember, but in the first episode, when I talked about lessons from orchids and orchid care, I talked about the fact that when a flower was starting to fade, how important it was to start taking that off from the orchid so that it didn't take up a lot of extra nutrients from new growth that was going to be coming behind it. Well, the same thing is true when I was trying to hold on to this plant and not let it go to plant heaven. A lot of care and effort would have been taken to bring it back to life. Now, was it possible to bring it back? Probably. And yet, think about the resources involved when it had already served its time. And when you think about that in your organization, there are some people who are there with you for a limited season. And when their season is up, let them go. Let them go to another place where they can continue to add value. Yes, you could grow, develop, and nurture them. However, the effort that it would take might take away from the resources that you have to also grow and nurture those who are the perfect fit for where you are now. And a lot of times I've watched people take too long trying to resuscitate something that they really ought to let go in their organizations. And this siphons away energy from other parts of the organization, and it causes those who are the perfect fit from where you are right now to become very frustrated and discouraged because they need your attention and cultivation to grow as well. So we must learn to say goodbye and realize that we can hold on to some people too long. So you don't want to be in that position, which then hampers your entire organization. And then, of course, when you let go of those things that are taking up a lot of time, even though you can do it, maybe it's not the best use of your time, then that brings me to the last item, which is to welcome and usher in the new. And I'll tell you, my new orchid is bigger, it's fancier, it's beautiful, and I can devote my energy and time to the new orchid and give it the proper lighting, the proper water, and the proper care. And the new orchid is the orchid for this time and for this season in my life. So think about all of those things about getting outside help, consulting with knowledgeable people. Number two, following the expertise that you learn about. Three, getting the hands on help when you can't do it yourself. Delegate to others. Bring in technology, the AI that you might need. Number four, when circumstances change, you change strategies. Don't do the same thing. And number five, accept that all things do have a season and you have to let go and say goodbye sometimes. And then number six, to welcome and usher in the new and put your energy and food and sustenance and resources on growing whatever that new thing is in your organization. So, as we close today, I want to share a reading from Ecclesiastes, the third chapter. And this is very relevant for what we're talking about today. And it says, starting with verse 1, to everything there is a season, a time for every purpose under heaven, a time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant, and a time to pluck up what is planted, a time to kill, and a time to heal, a time to break down, and a time to build up, a time to weep, and a time to laugh, a time to mourn, and a time to dance, a time to cast away stones, and a time to gather stones, a time to embrace, and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to gain, and a time to lose, a time to keep, and a time to throw away, a time to tear, and a time to sow, a time to keep silence, and a time to speak, a time to love, and a time to hate, a time of war and a time of peace. So let me ask you, what time is it in your organization? What is it that you need to do? What is it that makes the most sense for your current season and for ensuring that your organization grows, is sustained, and adds the value that you were intended to add. So have a blessed day and look forward to seeing you next time. Hello, this is Dr. Karen, and I want to tell you about my book, Lead Yourself First, the Senior Leader's Guide to Engaging Your People for Greater Performance and Impact. This book is about playing the music that only you can play. Leadership is about more than following clever techniques. You are the instrument of your leadership. People are inspired by you and how you show up. In chapter 3 of the book, which is called Forge Your Own Pathway, I share many experiences of creating a pathway forward when a pathway didn't exist beforehand. Sometimes that path is created through service, such as a time that I was taking a train every week from Wiesbaden to Frankfurt, Germany, to volunteer in the Army Hospital, the 97th General, and I was volunteering once a week as a psychologist. Little did I know that this volunteer job would later become a full-time employment opportunity for me. Because of the volunteer service, I was in the right place at the right time when the doors opened up. The metaphor that I often use for creating opportunities is the ability to see possibilities where none are visible. And I call this creating blizzard food. So just imagine, just like in Colorado, this could happen at any time. There might be a raging blizzard outside. You haven't gone to the grocery store yet. There's no obvious food in the refrigerator or the pantry. Yet, if you look hard enough, there is hidden food, and you can use it to create delicious meals for you and also your guests. So I encourage you, get your own copy of Lead Yourself First. Forge your own pathway forward. Create your own opportunities. Be the instrument of your leadership and create some delicious blizzard food. Hi, this is Dr. Karen Wilson Starks, President and CEO of Trans Leadership Incorporated. Did you know that workplaces can make a significant difference in the lives of people, and that you can create a positive culture that gets positive business results and also produces positive life experiences for your employees and your clients and customers? You can make a significant contribution to the world by creating the kind of culture where your people can bring their gifts to provide the most relevant and excellent products and services to your marketplace. What the research shows is that companies with excellent leadership are also more profitable. So as you flourish and as you grow in the world, you can do more for yourself as well as for others. So if this is resonating with you and you want to create a positive, profitable, and powerful corporate culture, and you care about succession, leaving the organization in a better position than when you found it, do keep in mind that that kind of legacy is something that's intentional. And I am happy to partner with you to take your organization to the next level and create that positive leadership culture. So reach me at Karen, Karen, at transleadership.com. Thank you for listening to The Voice of Leadership with me, Dr. Karen Wilson Starks. I am also your concierge executive leadership advisor for when you need to make tough business decisions, facilitate executive succession and transition, develop your executive team, lead change, create a positive and profitable culture, or leverage marketplace creative advantage. You can reach me at Karen, Karen, at transleadership.com. Also go to my website, transleadership.com, for more leadership resources and insights. I want to give special thanks to Ron McMillan, gospel jazz saxophonist and national Billboard recording artist, also known as Mr. Sirius XM Jazz Watercolors, for allowing us to use his gifted music on our show. Thank you for joining me today, and I'll see you next time.